is I heard that someone was getting a divorce and they were certainly in a negative mood, which lined up with kind of going through a difficult divorce. And so I approached them and I said, hey, I heard that you might be going through a separation or having a really hard time. If you need to change your name or your benefits, or if you just want to talk, I'm here. And their eyes just went wide and you could almost see the fear and panic go over them. Like, that was actually none of your business. Maybe I'm separating, maybe I'm getting divorced. Either way, I didn't ask you to get involved. And they just, kind of walked away, and they were right. It wasn't my place to get involved.
Hello and welcome to Growing Through It, your go-to podcast for real leadership stories. I'm your host, Jen Arnold. In every episode, you'll hear straight talk from leaders who face their own challenges. We'll dive into those whoops moments and the insights that followed. This podcast is about the lessons that refine us, shared to help you confidently lead in your own style. Whether you're looking to steer your team towards success or just seeking a spark of inspiration, you're in the right place. Let's grow through it together. Andrea, welcome to the Growing Through It podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thanks. I am thrilled to be here.
And why don't you go ahead and give everyone just a highlight of who you are?
Great. Yeah. So I am Andrea Herron. I lead HR for WebMD. I am a speaker, an author, and love to be on podcasts. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we actually met on one of those Achieve engagement. We were both on the same panel. So it's fun to be able to connect there and then now have this further conversation.
Yeah.
Now, how long have you been leading people?
Gosh, it's got to be at least a decade now. I feel like the COVID time is a time warp, but at least 10 years.
Yeah, like time flies by very fast, and COVID warped us all. So speaking of COVID, which no one wants to talk about anymore because it feels like it was yesterday, but then like years ago at the same, the same breath. But a lot of leaders were given directives to talk about mental health with their teams, or their teams came to them and they just had to deal with it on the fly. So I think mental health is something that has been put on managers and they don't always have the skills to navigate that conversation. So take us to the time where mental health really, I guess, got to be an important part of your leadership.
Yeah, I would love to. And I would say most leaders have no idea how to support people's mental health because why would we? Nobody really teaches us that. And I was in the same position in about 2017 when my personal introduction to this topic really came to the forefront and impacted me as a person and also very much so as a leader. My own sister came to me and, I'm her sister in HR. So she comes to me and says, oh no, I'm going to lose my job. I switched medications. My depression and anxiety have been out of control. I can't get my work done. I'm working with my therapist. And I was like, what? What therapist? What anxiety? You're on medication? I had no idea that my very own sister, same house growing up, everything. No idea that she had these issues. And it was really quite stunning to me because when I did try to help her, there was absolutely no information out there of how an HR department or a manager or even her as an individual could navigate that in the work setting because there was so much stigma around it. And so we did what we could. We got her through that situation with a reduced schedule and some support. And thankfully, she did not lose her job and she was able to manage through it. But during that process, we decided that since there was no support we could find outside of, legal definitions and, the ADA language, which is very hard for regular people to interpret, we actually wrote a book together called There's an Elephant in Your Office from the perspective of an employee with a mental health concern and what managers or leaders should do about it. And so that was really obviously a big undertaking, but once we started writing it, it was really interesting how many examples I had, even just during writing that book, of my own staff struggling and people I saw and things I heard. And it really kind of wrote itself. And then we published in 2019, and then the pandemic happened. So we were right on time.
Let me ask you a few clarifying questions.
Yeah.
So your sister also worked at the same organization?
No. She does marketing in Kentucky, and I'm out here in Portland. But we wanted to write it from both perspectives because I think you really need those personal stories and real examples and tactical information, which you can't get with just the jargony books.
No, not at all. I just wasn't clear. She was coming to you because of your HR background, and of course being your sister. Got it. Okay. And then, so never, you, like, growing up, this is the first introduction that you knew that your sister was struggling. Like, did she talk about why she didn't tell you beforehand, or did that get uncovered?
No, she thought she had to bear it alone, and she didn't want us to judge her, and she felt very shameful about it. And none of us knew. My parents didn't know. I didn't know. No, never.
I'm glad she did. And I'm glad she didn't lose her job and that there were accommodations made, which, there are, legal, like you said, the ADA regulations that are a mystery.
Yeah. And I just knew if I didn't know that about my own sister, I most certainly did not know the extent of struggles that people were having inside my organization and all the ways that we weren't helping them because we didn't know. And so it really shifted my leadership perspective of like, oh, wow, there's a lot going on here. And the adage, like, you never know what somebody else is dealing with. And that just hit me to my core after that experience. And I have really just taken that as an underlying approach to every single interaction, process, program, anything that I put out as a leader, because you don't know what people are carrying and they don't always want you to know. And that's also okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's the people struggling. So like the individuals that you lead that are struggling with mental health issues. I've also, when talking through some of my family struggles with people, you find out that there's a lot of family members, right? So people have kids going through it. People have siblings like you do, like I do. And that's a lot of weight on their shoulders too. So it affects so many of us. So you go into 2019, which is a brilliant time to have this book published. But how pandemic, I guess I'm trying to think of how to ask this question. Like, what happened then? How did you leverage all of what you've learned and got out of your brain in this book with the insight of your sister? Like, how did that shift? How did you approach your team?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it seems like I would have it dialed in. And in some ways we do. There are certain things that you can tell of how someone is struggling. And I can go over those in a second. But what was a super curveball was the instant remoteness of everyone. Because a lot of how you can tell if someone is doing well or not doing well is based on their typical normal behavior, which you see in person. So much easier to see in person. So if someone is usually very put together, but now they look disheveled or they haven't washed their hair, if someone normally speaks up in meetings and now sits very quietly or participates and doesn't, always says hello in the morning and now beelines for their desk and doesn't make eye contact. These are signs that something is going on. Maybe it's none of your business, but it's just, a little inkling that maybe there's more going on than you know. But once everyone went home, it was incredibly more difficult to see how people were doing. And we all know people weren't doing great. So we actually wrote a second edition of the book during COVID to add supplemental information about remote mental well-being and how you can tell when your teams are operating well, even when you can't see them. And it goes a lot to building trust, having conversations, because as well as I do, if you don't trust someone and feel like they have your back, you are not going to share vulnerable information with them. So that's always going to be step one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you feel like you can't trust your leader, if it's going to be held against you, or if you're not going to be getting a project, or your hours are going to be getting cut, like all of that plays into it. So there's a lot employees would probably want to keep from their leader. God, especially if they don't trust their leader, right?
Yeah, and there's stigma for a reason because nobody wants to be the person with an issue or somebody who can't do their job or unreliable. So I think the true, I don't know, the true way to really get to it is to build a trusting relationship, let your people know you have their back, which is honestly good advice just in leadership, period, no matter what we're talking about. But the biggest indicator we have found of organizations having psychological safety around openness and talking about mental health is if a leader, and it doesn't have to be the CEO, it can be anyone in a leadership position, talks about it. And I know that seems so simple, but like you mentioned earlier, every single person has come into contact with mental health in one way or another. If not directly, then with a friend or an extended family member or a colleague. I have never given a talk where people don't come up after me and say, oh, yes, this person and that person. Mm-hmm. It's just, we all experience it. And so if a leader just simply opens a conversation and makes it okay to talk about, that is the most successful indicator that other people will feel comfortable talking.
Did you share about your sister with your team? Like how did you open it up with your team to say, hey, this is an okay conversation to have?
Yeah, so I did talk about my personal experience. I did some trainings based on the things that I had learned. So I think that is another really important component is you have to give managers some language and tools because people are terrified to say the wrong thing. Understandably so. It is a little bit, you don't want to pry. People are entitled to privacy, but you also don't want to say nothing because then you're just keeping it, stigmatized. So I did share, but I also had other leaders share. So the more you can make it a regular thing. And again, this doesn't have to be, let me bare my soul to you on this very personal matter. It can be, hey, times are tough out there. We know people are having good days and bad days. And especially during the pandemic, it's like people are lonely. People are feeling isolated. How can we get together more? If you're struggling with anything, here's someone to talk to. Here's a resource. Here's what we have in our benefits package. So it's really just keeping it alive and going, even in a newsletter, open enrollment, printing out your EAP hotline, because nobody wants to dig down 12 links into the employee webpage to find that when they're having a hard time. So it's talking about it and making the resources you already have very easily accessible.
Yeah, and hopefully having resources beyond EAP, but that's another podcast for another day. Yeah. So let's talk about your leadership and any missteps maybe that you made when you were going out there, because like you said, I think a lot of people don't bring it up, not only because they're pressed for time, but you're so scared of saying something wrong. It's just easier not to say anything. So did you make some mistakes as you went out and tried to talk about mental health with your team? And how did you recover?
100%. Yes. I did a lot of wrong things in an attempt to do the right things. Right. So I guess a few of the biggest lessons learned for me is that not everybody wants to share, even if you do have a trusted relationship. I know I've mentioned privacy a few times, but sometimes you'll hear something through the rumor mill, or you'll just kind of know a certain thing and assume that because you're so invested and you have a good relationship that you should expect people to talk to you about it. And you can push people too far and then they shut down because they don't want to talk about it. So I learned that you do have to give people the space to still have their privacy, even if you're trying to help.
So I'm going to dig into that, and you're welcome. We can edit this out if you don't want to talk about it. Yeah. But were there any situations where you got into that and you were like maybe bringing it up, and what were you met with? Was it like I don't want to talk, kind of, if you could go into any specifics, because I think what managers do struggle is, what do you do when it goes off the rails, right? If you have someone defensive, if you got someone just shut down on you, how do you act?
Yeah, I've had several. I think the easiest one that's probably common is I heard that someone was getting a divorce and they were certainly in a negative mood, which lined up with kind of going through a difficult divorce. And so I approached them and I said, hey, I heard that you might be going through a separation or having a really hard time. If you need to change your name or your benefits, or if you just want to talk, I'm here. And their eyes just went wide and you could almost see the fear and panic go over them. Like, that was actually none of your business. Maybe I'm separating, maybe I'm getting divorced. Either way, I didn't ask you to get involved. And they just, kind of walked away, and they were right. It wasn't my place to get involved. And I wasn't really trying to get involved. I was trying to be helpful, but they didn't give me that information directly. I heard it and made an assumption that because I knew that person, that it was okay for me to bring it up. So I think that could be true even if someone is having depression or going through a breakup or even lost a loved one. I know that can be a little tricky too, and maybe a little bit different than a divorce. Condolences are often better received, but we shouldn't assume anything and then act on it.
Yes, I can only imagine. Oh, I'm just thinking of you in that situation, wanting to do well, but that person going, nope, not happening. How did it take you? I mean, I'm assuming it took you maybe a few days to go, oh, she's right, but it had to hurt in the moment. Like, how did you get through that process of going, oh, damn, I was really trying to help?
Yeah, I just felt terrible. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, I really overstepped. It took me a minute because, I was like, I was just trying to help. But then pretty quickly, I'm like, what if that isn't true? Like, that little doubt got in my mind, like, or if they didn't want anyone to know. And now because I'm in a leadership position, they think it's more widely known, or like, how did it get to you? Or who else knows about this? And I just felt really bad. And I did go apologize. And we were able to, move past it. But it definitely.
I love that you did that, because that's a lot of times when we make mistakes, we just have to say, look, I'm sorry. How did they take that? Was it welcomed, your apology?
Yes, I think it was unexpected. Kind of to your point, people don't always expect that, especially when someone in leadership makes a mistake, that you're not going to brush it under the rug. But I think it's really important to show that you are just a person who's trying. And when you do that, it makes people trust you more, because they trust that you'll own a mistake, because we all make them. And I just said, hey, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. It wasn't my place. I am here if you ever need me, but that wasn't my place to say that. And I apologize. And they were like, wow, thank you. And that was kind of it, but it did repair that relationship.
Yeah. So I guess one thing you learned was, if you hear something in the rumor mill, and we often do, right? They're going to tell someone, and maybe not bringing it up unless they bring it directly to you. Anything else that you've made tripped up on? Because we all have tripped up on some things, especially with these delicate conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I think the repair piece is also a learning. I don't want to skip over that too much, because the apology and the repair is important for all relationships, if it be your significant other, your kids, your friends, or even your colleagues and peers. It is never too late to go back and say, I've still been thinking about that. And actually, I shouldn't have done that. I was wrong. Always going to end up better for you to do that, even if it feels like it's been a while. I guess another time, because again, these are tricky situations. I had an employee who was bipolar, and I didn't know that at the time. And this person went missing. We could not find them for days. We were getting very concerned, very worried. And eventually we did learn they were in the hospital, they were getting care and treatment, and then they were released from the hospital. And we thought, okay, all is good. We did a check-in. I'm thinking everything is great. Like, we've done such a good job being supportive and like really, going above and beyond for this person to get them back to a better place. And then we get them back to work, and then immediately it kind of cycles through again. And again, we're going to do everything we can, and we're going to get that person back because they're a really good long-term employee. And I got really hard on myself, and I was so upset that I wasn't doing enough, or I wasn't helping. And how could this have happened? We did everything we could, and this person said this and that. And the thing I learned is that we are actually not responsible for our employees' behavior, good or bad or neutral. You can't take on responsibility over what an adult does. And that can be very difficult especially when you're really invested in trying to help them through a struggle. Their success is not your success, and their failure is not your failure. But it very much felt like that to me at the time.
I'm really glad you said that, Andrea, because I have also have a friend who led someone who was struggling with mental health issues, and she also got overinvested, and it took over, a lot of her thinking and worry. And so her boss eventually said, hey, look, you can't, you have to separate it, that you can only do so much. And I think having a sibling with mental illness, as you do as well, it's even harder in the personal realm. But eventually, especially because mental illness, especially with conditions like bipolar and others, such as schizoaffective, it's very cyclical, right? So you can be really good and everyone, taking their medicine, everything's good. And then hospitalization, or then another thing. It's just a lot of peaks and valleys with mental health struggles. So I love that you brought that up, because I think leaders can get overinvested and have to separate somehow between what you can do for the person and then what is outside of your span of control.
I agree. And I've had to coach managers on that so much in my career, yet I fell victim to it just the same, because we care, right? And it's like, when you care, and we're in leadership, you should care about your people, but where is that line of autonomy and respecting them as an adult to manage their own life, and making sure you give them absolutely every opportunity, resource, and support that you can? It was really blurry there for me, even though I've guided and coached plenty of other people on how to do it. So it was, again, another learning that I am also privy to that same advice and pothole, I guess I'll call it.
Because you're human. I mean,
yeah. Ugh, I know.
Damn it, we're human. Well, how did you walk yourself out of that? How did you determine, hey, I can do all I can do, but I need to kind of take myself out of it?
Yeah, I think it was just the ups and downs, kind of like you were saying. It was taking over my whole day. And at the same time, I was working with that employee's direct manager and giving her the advice, because she was way too invested, but I wasn't as invested as her, but still too invested, if that makes sense. So it was a little bit hard for me to see it at first, because I wasn't to the extreme that the manager was. But then as she kind of got herself together and set better boundaries, I guess, it became obvious that I hadn't. And so I was like, okay, she's kind of getting herself back to a place, and I'm still doing too much. So that's how.
Yeah. So speaking of, since you really work with managers with having some of these conversations and other leaders, what are some other pitfalls maybe that you've seen them have, or maybe questions that they come to you with that maybe you haven't experienced yourself, but they are experiencing, which means that leaders listening have probably experienced it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think sometimes managers don't feel empowered to make simple decisions on their own. So one pitfall I've seen is a manager not thinking they can approve a very small request or accommodation to make somebody else's day better. That could be a small purchase of noise canceling headphones. And maybe your company has certain restrictions. I get it. But what can they approve if someone asks? Or, what schedule change can a manager approve if someone needs to go to that counseling appointment? Or if they need a flexible schedule, what are they empowered to just say yes to? A lot of times I see there's not clarity there, and then they're too nervous to ask because they don't want to draw attention to it. And so they don't do anything. And the doing nothing is worse than trying something and failing at it. And in that same vein, not saying anything because they're nervous they're going to say the wrong thing is also detrimental, because it is so much better to say, hey, I may not know everything, but I do know that I care. And if there's something I can do to get you more organized, to better structure your priorities, to switch your schedule as we can, I'm here for you. Let me know. Those are kind of the two biggest pitfalls I have seen, is really autonomy, being clear on what they can and can't offer or say.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about what you said, at the beginning, is like when you notice that people's behavior and or performance has changed. It's an easy way to, and it's not easy. It's never easy, please. Like, these are hard conversations, but it's a window that is open, a door that's open to you. I'm mixing up all the analogies here, but it's a door that's opened. Hey, I've noticed X, Y, and Z. Are you okay? It can really be that simple to start, but I think you're right. They don't say anything because then you're going, what if they ask me something, or what if I say something wrong? So I think just leading with hey, I may not say all the right things, but what you just said, I really care. Like, I want you to be successful here.
And you nailed it. That is the best question. And if you frame the question with observable work-related behavior, you're
concrete examples, people.
Yes. Because this is not the rumor mill. It's not, did you break up? Are you changing your medications? You seem moody. No. I've noticed that you usually participate in our team meetings and you haven't in a while. Is everything okay? Hey, usually you turn in your work on time, and I've noticed it's starting to get later and later. Is there a roadblock or something going on? So these are very specific, concrete behaviors. But if you say, I notice this has changed, it also helps people not be super defensive, because you're not saying, hey, your performance has gone down. Do you need a performance plan? Hey, you're not turning your stuff in on time. I'm going to have to write you up. No, you're saying, I've noticed, and this is not like you. Like, something is going on. Do you want to talk about it? Is there something I could do?
Do you think that these conversations get any easier? Like, have they gotten any easier for you over time? Because I'm sure you've been leading for 10 years, so you're leading different people, right? Teams change, people leave, people come in. But has it gotten any easier for you to start these conversations?
I would say yes, it definitely has, because once you see the relief wash over somebody's face that you're going to help them, or that it could get better, or just that you see that they are having a hard time, but they are not a bad employee, it's very rewarding to help somebody through that. And it gets easier because it's genuine. You actually are caring and building that relationship. Now, that doesn't mean I don't still get a little nervous if it's somebody new or that I don't know, because everybody's different, so you do have to know the people. But the more you practice anything, the easier it gets. So I would say just start small and with people that you have a good relationship with, and then it gets easier and easier as you go.
Yeah. And the nerves are normal. You're you're having conversations that are uncomfortable.
Right.
So the nerves, you get better at it, but just knowing that the nerves are going to be there, and that's okay. It shouldn't stop you from having the conversation.
Absolutely. And be prepared. And again, that looks different for everybody. One tool that I have found works really well for people who don't even know where to begin it's called the Take 10 check-in. Super easy. It's supposed to be 10 minutes, but it could even be less than that. And there's 3 questions. How are you doing? Which you're going to get some type of information. How's the team doing? Now that's the one right there, because what we do as humans is we project our own feelings onto the team because it's safer. So you're actually going to get some more information about how that person is feeling and a little bit about the team. And then how can I help? And so if you don't even know where to begin, how are you doing? How's the team doing? How can I help? Is a great place to start. And notice I didn't say, how's your mental health? It's not that blunt.
You have to put it out there.
No.
So is this Take 10 check-in? Is it something that you all created at WebMD, or is it just out there somewhere as a framework?
I think it's just out there as a framework. I've used it for so long now, I don't remember the origin. So credit to whoever actually created it. But I use it a lot because it's so easy, and it's just, you could do it at the beginning of every check-in. It's 5 minutes and then you can move on, or you can expand it or drop it. But it's a great place to start if you don't even know how to engage somebody, if you're a new manager or a new leader to one-on-ones.
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. How can I help? Because it could be anything. It could be mental health. It could be a roadblock they're experiencing. It could be anything, but just ending it with it or starting however you want to do it. But I love those 3 questions.
Right. Well, and what if they tell you something you can do to help? Then you can actually help, and that builds the relationship.
Right? Yes. Don't ask, how can I help, if you're not willing to help either.
100%. Leave that one off if you're not going to do it.
Someone reading through notes, and how can I help? Next. I think these are 3 great questions. Now, what is your advice for other leaders going through this? You've already given a ton, but is there anything else that you'd want to let them know that you haven't already mentioned?
I just think you have to be brave and try it. Think about when someone was there for you in a very difficult moment in your life. You'll probably never forget that person's kindness. And that's what we're going for, is when someone is in a tough spot, you could be a lifeline. And I know that sounds dramatic, but a lot of times work is the most stable place in someone's life when they're going through a mental health struggle. And so being a reliable, consistent person is really monumental in those times. One other, I guess, more very specific tip is that most people, but most certainly people who have mental health struggles, do not like surprises. They like routine. They like to know what's coming. They like time to prepare. So if you're going to make changes, give as much notice as you can in advance. Even if it's like 3 months from now, we're going to change software. Great. Tell them 3 months in advance. But even more than that, never, and this is for everybody, everywhere listening, do not put a calendar invite on someone's calendar with no context and no reason of why you're meeting. Okay, that will freak a lot of people out, and it's just unnecessary stress to give someone.
Yes, it's so funny because I just created a career conversations guide for leaders, and that is literally in there to say, do not schedule talk career conversation on someone's calendar if you're not given the heads up. Here's what I'm doing, here's why.
I will say I learned that the hard way. Talk about another lesson. As the HR leader, I was doing that, not even thinking about it, because I knew it was no big deal. I just wanted to chat for a minute, and people were completely freaked out. And then after I did that to people a couple of times, somebody was like, oh my gosh, I've been terrified for days. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to do that to people. And so I stopped doing it.
What was the title on your meeting, Andrea?
It was just meeting with HR, or meeting with Andrea, or it was so silly now that I look back on it, but I knew it was fine. So it didn't even.
You had good intentions.
Yeah. Never even thought about it.
Thank you for admitting that, because it's such an easy thing to do, because you're like, I just want to talk with you. What's the big deal?
Yeah. You're not losing your job.
Right.
But now you think you are in 2 days, and you're not going to sleep for 2 days because you didn't know.
And then think about how productive that meeting is going to be, right? They're just like,
Exactly.
oh, I'm not going to lose my job. That's all they can think about.
Yes. I've done lots of stupid things over time.
We all have. And that is why we are talking on this podcast. Is because we all mess up. We're all humans going through this really hard, like working with other people, and we don't know it all. And so I think that the power is then that learning from our mistakes and apologizing when we screw up. So how did all of this, or how has this whole mental health conversations, the uncomfortable things that you've had to do, that you've done proactively, how has it made you a better leader overall?
I think it's made me a more empathetic leader. If nothing else, I have so much empathy for whatever people are going through. Even if I can't relate or I don't understand it, I know that it's real and it impacts people. Because I think, in times not that long ago, the motto was, oh, if you have depression, just go for a walk. You'll get over it, snap out of it. That's not real, or people would have done it already, So I think just being more realistic that struggles are real, whether or not we can understand it, is so important as a leader to not write people off and assume that they're just trying to get out of work or not work that hard. I mean, it's just not real. So this whole experience has made me more aware of what people go through and more empathetic to just understand that it's all real.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is real. Well, is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with before we end? Maybe anything that I didn't ask you or you didn't get a chance to say?
I think the only last thing I would leave is a quote I think about all the time and we've all heard, but I think is really relevant to this topic. And that's Maya Angelou, that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's what leadership is.
Amen. Well, we will just end on that, and I will link up your book. And is it one book, or is it a book and then an updated version, or is it two books?
Well, there's a second edition. So yeah, it's just the one. And I'm not biased at all, but I think it's very helpful.
Well, I will link it up in the show notes. Andrea, thank you so much for telling your story of your sister, and then also the fumbles that you've made as a leader and how you've recovered.
Great. Happy to share all these mess ups. Hopefully someone can avoid the mistakes I have made.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks again.
Thank you for joining us on Growing Through It. I'm Jen Arnold, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. If today's story sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and share it with your fellow leaders. And remember, each episode comes with a nugget of wisdom that we expand on in our newsletter. So if you're eager to put these insights into action, head over to our website at growthsignals.co and sign up for exclusive content that'll give you an edge in your leadership journey. Keep growing, and I'll connect with you again soon in our next episode. Until then, take the lessons learned and lead authentically.